platform allows decision makers to assess power sector vulnerabilities, identify resilient solutions, and make informed decisions to enhance power sector resilience at all scales. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward for collaborating in the future to advance our collective goals of building resilience of our energy system in the Caribbean region. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And I'll add that on the Resilient Energy platform, there is a special cybersecurity resilience wing that we've recently added that'll be especially interesting to those of you on the webinar today. It includes resources on our building blocks and also past webinars in this series that we've done. And this is also where we will post this webinar and the slides when they're available. So the next slide. Okay, so normally, I don't believe Dr. Burton has been able to join, but normally Dr. Burton from CARILEC provides an intro, but he was unable to make it today. But I'll provide a little background on our partner, CARILEC. So CARILEC is the Caribbean Electric Utility Services Corporation, and it's an associate of the electric energy solution providers. It's an association of electric energy solution providers operating in the electricity industry in the Caribbean, Central and Southern America, and globally. CARILEC endeavors to improve communication among its members, providing technical information, training, capacity building, conferences, and other services. And CARILEC plays a leading role in electric utility advocacy, growth, and sustainability in the region. And so we'd like to thank CARILEC for helping us put on this webinar. Next slide, please. All right, so we have a great lineup of presenters for today's session. I'd first like to introduce our regional partner, David Gittens. David is a cybersecurity consultant with extensive experience in the region with incident response and disaster recovery. He has a background in information systems management. He's the former head of the Barbados chapter of ISSA. He's certified in information systems risk, ethical hacking, computer forensics, and information security management. And he also advises government entities on addressing cybersecurity issues and developing cyber strategies. So welcome, David. Next slide, please. Our two NREL presenters today are Anuj Sanghvi and Shane McFly. Anuj has a background in electrical engineering and leads and contributes to several projects at NREL, including the Distributed Energy Resource Cybersecurity Framework, a Cybersecurity Value at Risk Framework, and consequence-driven cybersecurity analysis for extreme fast charging infrastructure. Shane's degree is in computer science, and he works on the DARPA Radix infrastructure and is lead on the Cyber Energy Emulation platform, as well as the Distributed Energy Resource Cybersecurity Framework and Cyber Energy Emulation platform. So I'm really excited for this session, so let's dive into it. Over to you, Anuj.
All right, thank you so much, James. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. The majority of components are essentially, we've divided the webinar into two parts. One focusing on developing a plan for dealing with cybersecurity incidents, and then execution of the plan, and then strategy of how you want to include certain aspects of cybersecurity incident response. Often we've seen the connection between planning and execution. It needs to be improvised, and we hope to be able to assist with this through this webinar and future engagements. I'd like to kick this session off with introducing the elements of a well-rounded cybersecurity program. And James, I think, mentioned the Power Sector Cybersecurity Building Blocks document that we had published not too long ago. And that document emphasizes on each of those blocks that are fundamental in strengthening the overall cybersecurity posture when it comes to utilities. So here's the document that I was mentioning, and we've all seen like a tremendous amount of cybersecurity incidents increasing and happening across all the industry, really from ransomware, data breaches, information leakages, and then there are multiple initiatives to counter them as well. But through this document, I'd like to focus on the seriousness of the consequences when it comes to power generation, transmission, and distribution entities, so utilities. The impacts of a cyber attack on utilities can be anything from disrupted services or anything catastrophic like loss of life. So these building blocks are a fundamental element of developing a strong cybersecurity program. And it also focuses on how you can keep improving all the associated processes. There are quite a few best practices and guidances already available for the generic information technology and information systems world. But we've tried to tailor it towards the operational technology and giving priority to availability of the system and the system resources, basically. Again, these are merely a starting point and foundational components, obviously, and each organization will have to structure their needs independently. So moving on and getting into cybersecurity incident response, which is one of the building block described in the document earlier.
All right, good morning all. I'm David Gittens, thanks Anuj. James would have given you a brief background, but since I've never worked with these organizations before, I'd like to thank USAID and NREL and CARILEC. And just to give you a little bit more background, I actually started my professional career as an electrical and electronic engineer, working with programmable logic controllers and engines. I then moved into telecommunications equipment. Then one day discovered this fantastic new thing called information technology. So I then dived into that for the next several years, working for regional organizations like IBM and Cable and Wireless. And then one day discovered something else. There's something even better than IT, information security. And that is what I've been doing for about the last 15 years or so. So basically that's my background. So now I'm going to start talking about the operational technology aspect of incident response. Now, operational technology is often linked to the internet, and that's for reasons of monitoring, environmental monitoring, logical monitoring, remote control. So often operational technology is linked directly to the internet, but it's also linked to the internal systems. And again, we're looking at things like for reasons of scanning and different management aspects, it's going to be linked there. And as we all know, the internal IT systems are going to be linked to the internet for reasons of remote work, patching, security scanning, monitoring, etc. What it means is that vulnerabilities related to the internet interface or related to the internal systems can impact operational technology, leading to the possibility of security incidents. So we need to consider that operational technology is not something that's just out there that doesn't have to worry about the hackers out there, that the rest that normal IT systems have to. So any weaknesses in terms of your employees, your contractors, external service providers, your vendors, anything with these people not following policies properly, not following procedures properly, not being careful with their authentication, credentials, their access management, you know, the different tools that they give, if they're not careful with them or they're not well versed in the use, anything like that creates a weakness whereby hackers can get into our operational technology. As a result, everyone in the organization plays a role in the cybersecurity and the incident prevention, regardless of if you're HR, if you're IT, if you're engineering, if you're admin. As long as you deal with any sort of IT system, you have some sort of responsibility in terms of protecting the operational technology. So I'm now going to hand over to Anuj, who will tell you a little bit more in terms of the introduction to incident response.
Yes, thank you so much, David, and great points. And again, most of you not sure if you already have come across this, but it is very important, and we'd like to start with this. And it's important to understand and apply the mindset of constant awareness, right? Awareness of the fact that there's nothing like fully secure or 100% or achieving 100% security. There can only be 100% effort and 100% readiness if importance is given to planning. So it is crucial to know that cybersecurity incidents that are happening all around the world can very well be targeted towards the operational technologies, like just David was mentioning, and which are in service for years, right? So we all know the challenges we face in updating or upgrading legacy equipment involved in power production. So for continuous and smooth operation, it is must to consider all kinds of what-if scenarios and plan if these critical assets are what happens if these critical assets are compromised. System operators to admins and managers to executive managers are required to be trained for the whole organization to be secure. And that's why I've listed some of the critical operational technology assets here that are in need of hardening. Your control servers, workstations, RTUs, PLCs, HMIs, and relays. I think there's even within the document that we've published, it's important to keep these assets also in mind while dealing with strengthening your cybersecurity posture. Moving on. So importance of preparedness, right? So why spend time preparing and planning for cybersecurity incidents? So first of all, it is only a matter of time that some vulnerability is targeted to be exploited, or some existing configuration becomes the vulnerability for tomorrow and becomes the weak link for a new attack. So in short, it's coming. Then preparing an appropriate response to any kind of disruption makes the process less stressful and more rewarding. It also prevents on-the-spot decision-making. I think that's really important. It enables prioritization of operations that are not feasible to overall business or supporting function if they are down. And it also enables quick restoration, which is extremely important aspects. So questions like how to be prepared for a compromised HMI will give you and help take control of a dependent operation quickly. Any other points, David or Shane?
Yeah, Anush, I was just thinking that when you talk about preventing on-the-spot decision-making, I think that's very important. What we're doing when we prevent on-the-spot decision-making is making sure that these decisions have been made ahead of time by the correct people and not just whatever someone's best guess is that happens to be there at the time.
Yeah, I agree. What it means is that the decision that you make once you have your incident response plan could be the result of several hours of experts weighing in on the best possible way to move forward. So whereas you may make that decision in under 5 minutes because you have your plan beforehand, that 5 minutes is really the result of several hours of people carefully deciding what is the best way to respond. So you make the best response, actually.
Yeah, exactly, and great points. Which takes me to the incident response culture, or like some aspects related to the human elements, right? So let's try to rethink some aspects that are related to the culture and how even like these small steps, such as locking your workstation when you're away from the desk, or mandating a password complexity or password change every so often, to name a few. So a supportive management can reform the way new hires or junior staff think about protecting the confidentiality and integrity of normal day operations. For example, discussing and promoting unique ideas in response to an incident that has happened to another organization. What could your group have done differently? So that's something that you want to encourage. Giving kudos to initiatives that enable a better process, a better assignment of roles, right? So incident responders are not someone whose jobs are only to respond to an attack, but they're also the ones that keep monitoring the operations. They're also the ones who develop the baseline of what normal behavior looks like. And they're also the ones who understand the traffic across the whole organization and across your operational systems, to be specific. David, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would say also in terms of the culture, there's certain things which have to be usual, the norm, things such as doing penetration testing, which you do at least every 6 months, vulnerability scans, reviewing the access logs to see who's signing into the system, looking at the security logs, analyzing to see if there's anything, you know, that doesn't look right, doing scans of what access points are in the system, scans of what software is in your environment, what devices are in your environment. These have to be part of the culture. These aren't things that you do only when there's a problem or when an audit is coming up or something. This has to be part of your actual culture of the organization from a security perspective. These are things you do all the time. And Anuj was talking about things like looking at the continuous monitoring and baselining. These things are easier if you're constantly monitoring, scanning, looking at your configurations. You know what your environment normally looks like. You know at this time of the year you see certain things and you don't see certain things. You know when you release the project what you do. So part of the culture would be doing these regular security things, these scanning, these checks, these reviews. That is very important. And also you have to understand with cybersecurity is not a simple thing. An incident response, that is a very stressful thing. So you need to make sure you have everything in place so that the incident responders can do these things as calmly and as efficiently as possible. And they need certain skills, malware analysis, ethical hacking, maybe cyber forensics. I mean, some of these things you can outsource, but as part of your culture, there's certain security things that you have to do as the norm, that this is what the organization does. This is how we monitor and manage what is happening. All right, Anuj,
Yeah,
that's it for me.
no, yes, thank you, David, and again, great points. So let's get into some aspects that are going to assist us in developing in the development of an incident response plan, and let's look at some processes and actions that we can start taking. So in developing a plan, we want to be able to follow the overall security and privacy policies set by the organization's management and stakeholders, right? There may be several laws and regulations that will need to be complied with when it comes to reporting and releasing information to the appropriate authorities. And I think David will get into more details, but I want to focus upon like the plan should also ensure proper verbiage for security terms, categorizing different aspects of response for better organization, and it enables distribution of roles and responsibilities. Importance should also be given to details of the business function supported by various operations. This enables identification of dependent operations as well. And it is utmost important to include stakeholders and keep them in the loop while identifying and prioritizing mission-critical assets. Questions like, how many minutes, hours, days can you go without a primary system operating at full capacity? This will help you have a perspective from a resilience angle. A mission critical control server on which a significant amount of operation depends on should definitely have a redundant backup available at all times in case the primary were to be a victim of an anomaly. And lastly, this plan should be revised and updated periodically. Shane or David, did you guys want to add?
Sure. When we talk about prioritizing assets, there's a couple of different ways we can look at that. And I think it's important to remember that not only are the mission critical items a very high priority, but so are some of the different parts of the system that may lead to liabilities. And I think the chief financial officer will have a say in some of this in determining what the costs of losing part of that system may be, whether it's in terms of downtime or in terms of legal fees, running afoul of compliance laws, or failing to prioritize resources for incident response. Something else that it comes to mind is that here's a good time to decide how much time is able to be spent on digital forensics. It's going to be part of the incident response, but in certain cases, returning to uptime will be a priority, but we still, in order to be able to add to our lessons learned and to move and grow from this in the future, the more time we can spend on digital forensics, the better. And so we really need to make those plans ahead of time so that we're not just replacing whole systems, wiping hard drives and losing all important data.
Yeah, very, very good points there. Something else need to bear in mind, as it was mentioned, this is part of the cybersecurity policy. The incident response plan doesn't stand on its own. It's going to be related to your crisis management plans, your disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans. So you would need to be mindful of those. It'll use some of the same resources and it needs to line up with those, because incident response is part of the overall management of different disasters and problems within the organization. So that's something you need to remember. And I can't overemphasize the importance of this plan. I once helped an organization, a large important organization, which had been hit with a cyber incident, a significant one. But because they had no incident response plan in place, they didn't know what to do first, who to call. They were not sure who they need to escalate to. And it caused a lot more stress, a lot more problems, and they wasted a lot of time actually dealing with the incident aspect as opposed to the restoration aspect. So of course, it took them longer to respond. They weren't prepared to do things like Shane was just spoken about the importance of forensics, cyber forensics. They had, they weren't prepared to do anything like that. So therefore, they couldn't be sure of how far the incident really spread and exactly at what point they had properly resolved it. So without a plan, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in serious trouble. And it's going to impact you in terms of time, reputation, revenue, fines, expenses. So no matter what you do, no matter how hard it is, you need to make sure that you get this plan done and that you get this plan done well. And I believe in the next slide, we're going to go more into that for you. So back to you, Anuj.
Excellent points, David. Which takes us into more aspects of the plan development when it comes to creating like this repository that will have all the guidance documentations and we make sure to have all the playbooks that David was mentioning, and is accessible to all, right? It needs to be well communicated throughout the groups, throughout the organization, and intergroups agencies as well, like a communication plan for how to report an activity, an incident, or an event to either your group members or other groups that are also affected, and also to your management, essentially. So, Shane, any other points?
Yes. So in part of your plan development, you should be considering the fact that while there are unique needs for the OT portion of your system, that does not mean we need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to the IT parts, right? So we have industry best standards in place, and we can borrow heavily from the enterprise networks and all the lessons they learned, the tools that they use for those parts of our system that they pertain to. We also want to keep in mind as we work our plan, what level of compliance to local regulations does this bring us, and what security controls are relevant, and make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that we're achieving those controls in that compliance.
Exactly. David, did you have any more points?
Yeah, the incident response plan falls naturally under the incident response policy. It's part of the IT governance of the organization. Now, all policies ideally should be done, they should come from top down. The senior executives should sign off on them, and they should give the buy-in and encourage people. Because if you realize that your senior people are not that interested, it's going to be harder to get the ordinary people in the organization to follow. Also, in terms of money, a lot of these things you can use on open source tools, but overall, a lot of these things cost money. And you need the senior execs to be bought in so that they can provide the necessary resources, financial and otherwise, to get these things off the ground. And so the senior people need to believe in it and express the support. And of course, they need to follow the policies. So that is very important. Remember, it is policies, and the thing with policies, also policies need to change. They need to be reviewed periodically, as we would have said, and then because things change, your operating environment may change, the legal environment may change, the threat landscape in terms of how the different people are attacking you, that may change. So you need to have the policy reviewed regularly enough so that you look at changes. Say, for example, ransomware, which is something which is has been evolving a lot over the last 12 to 18 months. So your policy needs to make sure that you cover that. I actually recommend that you have a playbook specifically for ransomware because of the regularity of it, as well as the impact. The impact is very serious, and the attack is changing. So having a playbook means that you have procedures that you develop beforehand that experts would have weighed in on, and you know, we do A, then B, then C, then D. So you're not guessing. You're in the middle of a crisis. You're not panicking. You have a playbook. It lines up with your overall incident response plan, and you know this is the best way to handle this to help the organization in terms of downtime, reputation, and expenses. So I advise people, because people who have been trained in dealing with ransomware from 3 years ago, they can't use the identical response then because ransomware has evolved. So that is one of the things that I encourage you to have a playbook for. So thanks, Anuj.
Yeah, no, excellent points, David. And I think some of the aspects of just updating and reviewing and addressing any gaps in those policies, you know, they go back to doing periodic risk assessment that we will get into, like I think it's just a slide or two later. So yeah, great points. And then the plan outcomes, right? So the target outcomes of having this plan should be awareness, again, awareness amongst group members and staff about who's responsible for what, you know, understanding of interdepartmental priorities, like a group of operators may have a different perspective of some operations than a group of system engineers. So just understanding and conveying that priorities about a particular system would go a long way. The communication plan, you as an outcome, you need a solid, robust communication plan for how to convey information across team members and management, like I mentioned before. And then, of course, prioritization of operations and assets. And you need to ensure that everybody understands that, and that information is conveyed to everybody again. Any other points?
I just want to point out that your plan and your outcomes are going to both evolve over time. And as you go through incidents and respond to them, you're going to have lessons learned, and this is going to be an ongoing thing. This is not a plan that sits on the shelf and it's, followed verbatim for all eternity. This is going to grow. It's going to change as we learn, as new threat models appear, and as we realize that some of our assumptions were off base.
Exactly. Thanks, Shane. Yeah, so moving ahead is the periodic risk assessment that I just mentioned. These risk assessment, they help identify gaps, compliance gaps, and they also identify if your priorities were straight when it comes to what operations and what systems were supporting the primary mission of your organization, right? So really important aspects. David, Shane?
Yeah, risk assessments, there are various types of risk assessments. They're done with different levels of risks, with rigor, depending on like the regulations you need to comply with, if your focus is mainly security, and the type of operations. So your risk assessments would be catered based on your organization. The frequency of them would also be based on the priority of the particular system you're looking at. But the idea of a risk assessment is to identify gaps and weaknesses. Not only identify, but you want to quantify them. You want the board level to understand them well enough, and you want to give them an opportunity to say how we're going to address these gaps. Are we going to accept the risk? Are we going to sign it? Are we going to reject it? Are we going to mitigate it? And coming out of your risk assessment, not only is useful information for the board level, but also these risks can go towards your risk register. Your risk register would be a central register of the different risks discovered by various methods. They may be discovered by IT audits, vulnerability scans, maybe penetration tests, maybe a self-assessment. If you have internal audit department, the internal auditor may identify them. Your service or help desk, certain problems reported to them may then end up hitting your risk register. But the risk register is the one central place that you should be able to look to see what are the different cyber risks that I'm aware of. And in the risk register, you would say who owns the risk, because it's important that someone own it. And also you look at the mitigation. Is there a plan in place? When do you expect to mitigate it? How long do you expect to have to deal with the risk? So it's very important to do these periodic risk assessments, because without them, you're not really going to have a good handle on what is happening in terms of your risk. So it's something that I encourage any organization that doesn't have a program of risk assessments, that you put it in place. It's the best ways. Best to know about something, a weakness, and be able to prepare for it, than to just have an incident and not have a clue that you had this exposure.
Great points, David. And I just want to point out the reason why we talk about periodic risk assessments here. It's easy to fall in the fallacy that, well, my system hasn't changed. We haven't upgraded anything. We haven't changed any equipment. All of our routes and all of our equipment has stayed the same. And so we probably don't really need a new risk assessment. And that's absolutely false, because, over time, our risk posture changes regardless of whether we make changes to the system. So there's patches to consider. There's new 0-day vulnerabilities. There's new threats. There's new threat landscape. There's new types of vulnerabilities, new attacks, and new threats. So to do this periodically is very important, and it should be as thorough as possible. And to speak to Bradley's question a little bit, I think that in as much as you have the resources to invest, then very thorough risk assessment, including asset-based risks and scenario-based risk assessments, is crucial.
Definitely, and great points, David and Shane. And I'm seeing some traffic within the chat window. Also, great questions there. We will get to those after the rundown of the assessment. I just wanted to make a point on periodic risk assessment. Is there are tools available, right? There are tools available by NREL itself also, and we talked about, while introduction, the Distributed Energy Resources Cybersecurity Framework, which is a tool which is available to all. It focuses on governance, it focuses on technical management, and it also focuses on physical security. So it's just like you kind of want to keep doing those kinds of assessment for all your operational technology groups. You can take assessments for individual groups or an organization as a whole, but key thing again to Shane's point is doing them periodically and going back to bridging those gaps in your risks. Moving further. So let's get into some of the strategic initiatives, and that might be useful for us to take. What would make the response better is to have tools, appliances, and guides be prepared, right? So tools such as intrusion detection systems or log analyzers that assist in mostly all phases of incident response. Baselines include understanding of what normal behavior of your systems looks like, and just to be familiar, right? So this is how each and every system and my asset operates, and the system operators and system admins, they kind of get familiarized with, okay, this is what normal operation looks like, setting up thresholds that if this value goes beyond certain limit, then there's a flag, and you define that for your system and for your own operations. Getting golden images for your desktops and servers built and enforcing these vetted images and configurations on company devices is crucial. Shane?
Yeah, I just want to add that when we're talking about baselines, I see images and configurations, but also we want to look at network traffic and device behavior. And even though something may remain within the proper guidelines of that device, like is it doing so the way it normally does? I mean, does this thing usually run a little bit high and now it's not, or vice versa? And just knowing our system inside and out, and just knowing what the ground truth of what our system looks like in a base state is crucial.
Very true. Yeah, and that's just the planning aspect, right? So you want to be able to be ready in knowing and familiarizing with how your operation and assets function, which will go a long way when it comes to implementing certain scenarios. And when a system or an asset were to go down, how do you optimally respond to either rebooting it or putting on a new image or what have you? And we'll get into those shortly. Another aspect of the strategy implementation is development of Gobags, if you will. So what are they? They're essential required processes, devices, backup information, contact information. I think David was just mentioning with his example. Size, location, logbooks, be ready. When something happens, the staff is not scarce, and so the staff is not confused as to where to start. And so it should be like a one-stop shop for everything they need to prepare themselves. Yeah, Shane, did you have any further points?
Again, I wanted to reiterate that these kits, like the rest of your plan and all of your equipment, they need to be regularly maintained and updated and upgraded. I know from personal experience that a lot of the tools that we use on the Radix project to interact with the devices were Windows-based executables, and so our Gobags had Windows laptops in them. And I'm sure everyone here has woken up to Windows requiring 1,000 updates, and in the middle of a crisis is not the best time for you to wait for your computer to reboot 3 or 4 times. And even worse than that is say, oh, it's an emergency, I'm going to skip these patches for now and just plug my machine into the system. And now you're introducing another vulnerable device into an already compromised system.
exactly. Great points, Shane. So let's get into the incident response phases, and these basically just divide what you kind of want to do and what you kind of want to focus on when it comes to responding to an incident, right? So what you want to prepare, you want to spend some time preparing, and we talked about importance of preparedness, identification of resources, tools, detection. So detection phase is identifying the correct information, and you want to be able to make sure what has happened, you know what has happened, what assets and what operations were affected, and then analyzing. I think there's an analysis phase as well, and then containing this the incident, containment, and isolating a compromised device and not letting it spread out to other devices. Again, to Shane's point, is in the process of responding to an event, if you add on an additional vulnerable system, that's only going to make your lives more difficult than to improve. And then post-incident and recovery is when you focus on lessons learned and how to improve the whole process. So preparation. So in this particular phase, we want to be able to start thinking about list of assets. Is your asset inventory up to date? And I think I saw one of the comments within the chat, really great points about having and understanding that an identified list of assets is at utmost important. Next, you want to be doing is prioritizing them by importance level, right? Then build a communications plan, and then behavior analysis of these devices. So after you've compiled the asset list and after you've rated their importance level, you need to understand and monitor their traffic and create what is called the normal operation or the baseline for comparisons later. Don't forget to get buy-in from everybody. Like I said, the priorities of different groups may be different, but it's important to get understanding and to address that some operations might have varied priorities depending on the groups. Shane, did you want to add anything here?
Just to say that I think an important part of preparation is relying on lessons learned from previous events to evolve your preparation plan, right? So this is something that's going to evolve over time. And it's a bit of a theme with some of my comments, I know, but it's important to remember that the threat landscape changes, the attacks change, like we need to stay on our toes.
Exactly. And I think that also reiterates, like, each organization will have it differently. And so you would need to define and prepare for what kind of an event or an incident is going to affect your operations, and you need to prepare for that accordingly. Next comes the identification phase, where I was mentioning is recognition and identifying events from incidents. So the goal would be to identify threats from a number of sources. These can include like understanding of IDS or IPS, so intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system logs, firewall logs, system logs and alerts, as well as other activities that is identified by or identified to be anomalous or suspicious across the network. So what flags that you have put in advance, depending on your operations, and you need to be able to take that into account at the right moment. And after such incidents or threats have been identified, the team must document every aspects of that incident or event, and communicate the details according to the procedure outlined in the planning phase. Yeah, that's about it from me. Shane or David, did you guys want to add anything?
I think you pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree.
Yeah. So that gets us into detection and analysis phase. So the detection portion of this phase includes collecting all the information. So you've within the identification stage, you've consolidated all the threats or threats from all the sources, and now you move into what resources you would need into applying all that information to, right? So including security tools, IT systems themselves. They publish a lot of information and also humans. So we are also critical resources that can get further into identifying what has happened and detecting the accurate malicious activity. This phase also involves identifying and documenting the precursor, so the events that led up to the incident, which serve as warning signs, right? So those warning signs, you want to be able to document that so that in the post-incident phase, you go back to the loop, complete the loop and feedback loop of you need to improve and upgrade your plan according to those warning signs. As well as the incident indicators, so evidence that prove that the event occurred or is occurring. Shane, did you want to take the analysis portion?
Well, what I wanted to, okay, sure. So the analysis part of the phase is when the incident response team, they identify the ground truth of the system, and then they compare it against the state of the system following the incident, and then they record all the anomalous behavior. And I think really this is where we start to do digital forensics. And even as we draw some conclusions based on those digital forensics, we make changes to attempt to contain and eradicate malicious evidence or effects on the system, that we continue to do digital forensics so that even once we've got the system back up and running, that we may find newly find devices that we missed in the first round. So this is an ongoing process.
Definitely. And I think you touched a little bit of containment as well, is we want to be able to stop the attack and or stop the spread of the attack, try to isolate the compromised system or the compromised asset, and obviously stop the attack from overwhelming other resources and cause more damage. So like, again, the priority that you perform, the prioritization actions that you performed prior in the planning phase as well as the detection phase will come handy, because now you know what operations just cannot be affected. So you want to keep the affected or compromised assets contained. And that would help you into restoring of critical operations also. So restore mission critical operations because you have that priority in place. The phase and the strategy of isolation also depends on the level of damage the incident can cause, the need to keep critical services available to employees and customers, and the duration of solution. So it kind of depends on a whole lot of aspects. So depending on those aspects, is a temporary solution okay, or that would just fix for a few hours or days or weeks, or do you need a permanent solution right away? So depending on those aspects about critical services and do you want them to be in place, you would need to answer these questions accordingly. And as a part of the containment phase also, it is important to identify the attacking hosts and validate its IP address. So once you know that the attack is propagating or initiating from this particular IP address, you can start acting against it, right? So you can start putting in rules or access control lists and what have you to stop that IP and the range of IPs from getting in, and block the communication, if you will. That pushes us towards the post-incident stage. So this one is, again, after the incident, what is it that what has happened, and what is it that you can take back to improve on your planning and response phases in general. So it's a constructive feedback and a loop for yourself, for your organization, to improve the strategy and the whole overall process. Identifying the areas that need more resources, tools, knowledge, people, what have you. So all these resources, right? So you would understand what tools are needed in one particular phase. Maybe you were lacking the correct skill set from particular staff, so you would need to spend more time training those staff, or you didn't have people at all for one particular phase of the response. So developing a plan or communicating that to upper management as to we do need proper skills and proper knowledge conveyed to the staff, existing staff, or proper skilled new staff that we do need to hire, so that this particular phase of the incident response is addressed. It's constant development, so you need to constantly improve the training, documentation, response times, and what have you. And these set of questions that are listed here is something that you need to ask yourself and ask the process again and again. Were the procedures followed? What were the gaps in following the procedures, right? Did everybody know what they were supposed to do when the incident was happening? How could you do it better? And stuff like that. So any precursors or indicators of compromise that you came across, you can go back and make them something of a flag in your system right on in the future. So detection of similar incident will be easier from that forth. Shane, did you want to emphasize on the importance of maybe digital forensics?
Sure. Yeah, that's what I was jumping at the bit. Yeah, so this is where we really get our hands dirty in digital forensics. So now that the incident has been contained to the best of our ability, and now we can really kind of look at whatever is left and find out what actually happened. And this could take weeks or even months after the fact. And now we fall back into when we were talking about in the planning phase, getting the right experts in the room and giving them hours to make decisions about the plan. Now we have the experts in the room and we're giving them hours to decide what the right type of actions were to contain the threat that was found, right? And so clearly in the last step, we talked about containment. And I think that there's really no getting around the fact that you're going to have some quick responses made by people in the field, and they are going to do their best effort to contain it as best as they can with their limited resources. But now we can look back and see whether or not those containment measures were sufficient, or whether we need to bolster them in some way, and then to apply that to the lessons that we learned, and to maybe reapply that to the training plan, to let people know, like, here's some better actions to take if a similar scenario arises.
Yeah, definitely. That exactly. So that touches the point about training. So how do you train for something that has not happened? So you usually, what we could recommend is using of planned outage or maintenance windows for an IR exercise, right? Practice responses. So if there is an incident which is occurring to another organization and you hear about it, or it is public, usually these kinds of incidents are not public until at a later point. But when they do get public, it is really important to make those as a what if scenario. So what if this incident were to happen to this particular critical asset or this particular critical operational group? How would you start and respond to that incident? And whose going to be responsible for what aspects of those incident phases that we went through. So training is utmost important. Training in terms of building resources and guides that your staff can go back to. If the procedure is lined up, the plan is lined up for even newer staff to come in and get themselves trained, it's going to help you in a long way. So if there is a constant hiring happening and your group is expanding, and you have a lot of new people joining in, you want to be able to point them to correct resources and have them train. Ensure that the training is up to date and they are at least aware of the basics that need to be done in terms of when an incident were to happen. And again, cannot emphasize more on updating and evolving the training plan as well as you go and as you learn more about these zero-day vulnerabilities, for example, and newer scenarios that just keep on coming up, rising. Shane, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I'd like to, I agree with everything you just said, Anuj, that training is super important. And it also feeds into what we talked about earlier, which is that a culture of cybersecurity, culture of resilience, and just making it part of the everyday life of all of your employees, right? And so some of this training needs to be not specifically designed for incident response, but more incident prevention, I think. And, cybersecurity is a very hard problem, but a lot of times we find that we're not even doing the easy stuff correctly. Right. So there's people attached to these systems, and the people are, we find, the largest vulnerability of any system. And so we need to train them on really even just basic things and just ingrain it into the culture, that we don't click on links in emails, that we don't respond to phishing attempts, that we don't fall for these emails. And I just can't reiterate enough that just email training is one of the things that I think gets overlooked frequently, and it really needs to be part of the security training and made a part of the culture.
Yep, I definitely agree with that. And then that takes us to, how do you measure successes and failures? So within the process of responding to an event, you realize a lot of aspects. You realize that the time and resources required to successfully restore operations was so and so. And you would go back and say, you need to, how much of an impact was that response time on these critical operations? And either it is a success if you could actually push and reduce the restoration aspects and come back online as quickly as possible. That's a sign of a really good success, right? Again, the next point would be the ability to isolate areas of impact. That's another measure and metric to measure your success. How seamlessly and how effectively were you able to isolate that particular operation or system which was affected. And then again, backup configuration. So backups which were ready within your Gobags, were they easily deployed? Were you able to use them as you intended to? And stuff like that. So those are the metrics that you would want to keep in mind in terms of revising your processes and revising your plans. And so any areas that you see that needs to be worked on, again, goes back to that constructive feedback loop and addresses the plan all over again. Any other points?
Anuj, I was just thinking that one source of metrics for this will come from our financial folks, right? These guys will be able to tell us,
oh, yeah.
What did this incident cost us in terms of man hours, in terms of lost revenue, in terms of lawsuits and all of that. And as an incident response person, as a cybersecurity person, this is not my purview. And so we really want to make sure that we have all the stakeholders in the room and really the people that can provide us that data. And a lot of times in these situations, it is those financial folks, because even though their priorities may not always align with ours, they might give us some insight into like where we really we're losing some time or, creating cost, and where we could adapt our incident response plan to become more efficient.
Definitely. Excellent point, Shane. And then, yeah, wrapping up, I think we have some resources that are lined up here, starting with the power sector cybersecurity building blocks document that we had mentioned. And then I think I'll hand it over to you, James, to just go maybe just talk a few points about these resources, and then let's start taking questions, if you will. You're still muted, James.
Thank you. There's got to be one in every session, right? But thanks to, I was just saying thanks to you and thanks to Shane and David for all your great thoughts and all the good content you covered today. I think it's been really interesting and informative and engaging based on all the questions and action that we're getting in the chat here. So we'll get to some of those in a second here. I do just want to point out, yep, on these resources, a lot of free resources, which are great, including the building blocks document. And then also the team here and others are available for free direct technical assistance. You can go to any of these links, these first 3 links here, and find your way there eventually. Or there is an Ask an Expert form you can fill out and ask for direct technical assistance too, if you're interested in kind of setting up an exploratory call to determine how we might be able to help your utility bolster cybersecurity. All right, so I think with that, we go into the question and answer session. But actually before, so we can go to the next slide. But before that, Dr. Cletus Burton from CARILEC has joined the session. So I'd like to give him the opportunity to say a couple words. If you're online and can unmute, welcome.
Yes, good morning, good day, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Apologies for not being on at the scheduled start of the meeting. I had a little mix-up on my end, but most grateful for the opportunity to address the participants and organizers. Just to express our thanks at CARILEC, our tremendous appreciation for the opportunity to partner with NREL and USAID in this venture. As we all know, it's a very topical, relevant, critical area of operations. That could impact very significantly on utility operations and also that of the customers' lives and livelihoods, the economic and social life of the Caribbean region. So we're very thankful for this collaboration with NREL and USAID, and we look forward to future engagements with you along this series. And we will continue to work with our utilities in terms of engendering a greater level of participation and increasing awareness and capacity in this area. So thank you. I'm following along the session, extremely, tremendously useful, and I trust that our participants will find it so as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you. All right, so we do have a lot of questions. I will try to get to, we will all try to get to as many as we can. And if we don't get to them, we'll try to follow up with you afterwards. But for now, let's just get right into it. So if you have further questions, please enter them in the chat or the Q&A on Zoom, and we might be able to squeeze them in. But we'll start with this question. And it's from Bradley, and it's asking, how often should an organization do a tabletop exercise which focuses on scenarios where the incident response plan has to be used?
I'll take that one. It depends really on the operations and how fast things are changing. The advantage of the tabletop is the easiest type of exercise to do. So you can do it regularly. You may be able to do a tabletop every 2 or every 3 months, which is probably reasonable. But of course, as I said, if if you're changing the things rapidly, you may want to do it more often. But as tabletop is easy and you're not going to impact operations, it is something that you can do as often as you need to. Once you can assign the particular resources, get all of them in the same room or whatever, or the same Zoom session or Teams at the same time.
Well, I think those are great points, David. I'd like to just kind of double down on that and say, I absolutely agree that it really depends on your system, the size of your operation, and your day to day. But also what you can do is create communication between the folks that are adapting your system and the ones that are developing these tabletop exercises, so that they know that, hey, we changed the system in a way that makes that tabletop exercise no longer fully relevant, right? We added some new feature, we added something new that you can test. And so I think it's great to keep that line of communication open, because then as you evolve your system, you can evolve your exercises and make sure that you're testing the new stuff, right? And focusing on that so that you're training your people as well.
Great, thanks. Next question then we'll go to is, how can an organization minimize or eliminate having to pay a ransom in order to continue operations?
Well, the best way is to have a backup which is good enough that you can restore and not lose too much data. Of course, you need input from the business in terms of how far back you can be off from being current. But the backup is the trick. But it's not necessary to have a backup, but your backup plan should be well thought out and it should be tested. A lot of organizations have had backups and still had to pay ransomware for a number of reasons. In some cases, you didn't test the backup, so you couldn't restore it. In some cases, you may have been doing a cloud backup and the hackers were able to encrypt your backup as well. So when you went to a backup, you couldn't use it. I've heard of an instance where an organization, it had its encrypted backup offline, but the keys for the encrypted backup were kept on the machine that the hacker encrypted. So they couldn't get to their backup, right? Then the backups, in some cases, the backup, I've heard of people doing backups, they're backing up online, but they didn't consider the volume of the backup and the speed of their connection. So when they calculate, to do a complete restore over the net would take them months. They can't be done for months, so they still pay the hacker even though they have a backup. So you need to really plan your backup strategy properly and test it. You need to know that not only can you get to the backup and the keys to unencrypt your backup, I mean, when you encrypt it yourself, but you need to make sure that you can get that backup restored in a timely manner. You need to calculate, all right, I have 10 terabytes backed up. How long will it take me to download that over the wire? It's going to take 3 months. Therefore, that's not a viable plan for ransomware. So the key is in planning and testing a good backup strategy.
Yep, excellent point. And I just wanted to add, David, the importance of going back to the containment phase, right? So we want to be able to isolate a compromised system as quickly as possible. And then if you do have a planned backup and a tested backup that is easy to be deployed, I think that would minimize the risk, to answer that question.
Great, thanks. And I'll point out here, we are at about the originally scheduled end of the webinar time, but we have so many good questions. We'll keep going for a few minutes more. Hopefully that's okay with all of our panelists here. But I'll call now on, I think, well, I was saying, I don't know if Marina, if you're still online, you've had your hand up for a long time. I don't know if I see you put it down now, but if you do, you've had your hand up for a while. So if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in and ask the question now. Maybe it was a stray hand from earlier, but if you do have, feel free to type a question in the chat or put your hand back up if you'd like to get your question answered. We'll go to this next question then. Let's see, does the Caribbean have any SOCs or NOCs, so security operations centers or network operations centers, where Caribbean utilities can refer to for any threat intelligence or forensic analysis, especially because a lot of Caribbean utilities are small and don't have that in-house skill set. They might have to rely on outsourcing some of those things. I don't know if that's anything that maybe David or the other panelists have any knowledge of.
I believe there may be a knock around. I don't know if it's peculiar to like utilities. I believe there may be some knocks around in terms of a regional SOC that they can access. I'm not sure. I can't speak of any for sure, but I can't say that they're none either. I'm not sure. But I would say that those are things that we really need to be looking at because it's really important. And yes, it's true. A lot of the Caribbean entities, because they're so small, you know, they don't have the in terms of the financial resources and the people to actually set up these things. It's not practical for them to set it their own. So in some cases, maybe we could advocate, if they don't exist at the moment, to actually create some like regional SOCs where different organizations can pay in to help the setting up and the maintenance of it. And the thing training for those sort of things is readily available by a lot of international organizations. And as we would have said, there's a lot of free training and thing out there. So the training aspect you can deal with, but it's actually to stand up the organization, to hire the staff. That is where organizations can come together to create, if it doesn't already exist, create a regional one to help the Caribbean organizations.
Great, thanks. We'll go with, let's see, next question here just came in. Any recommendations on how to best manage risks with equipment that OEMs do not provide the IT access to, but they're still part of your infrastructure?
So
I can
go ahead.
go ahead, Shane.
Okay, I was just going to say that I know that in a lot of cases, some of this equipment, if we're talking specifically about the OT end of things, where they're not really storing a lot of data that we need, they're just like have the configurations and they're performing a service. So what we have is where economically feasible, we have complete backup systems that are ready to be replaced. Right? I know that they did this in the aerospace industry. If they find evidence of malicious software on the airplanes, they'll just pull the whole computer out and put a new one in because that plane's got to go. And I think it's the same is true for the power, right? The power's got to go. So we just pull the whole sensor, or we pull the whole PMU with hopefully one that's already been pre-configured to the same state and just replace the device. Where feasible, obviously we can't have backups for every piece of equipment, but the ones that are critical.
Yep. And I think just wanted to add there, so priority will help there. And then I think to address that particular problem, like moving on or doing your future integrated infrastructure or assets, I think it would be beneficial to address and have those questions in the procurement or in the even before that, in the RFP stage. So before even you start engaging with vendors and manufacturers in order to buy an equipment, I think these questions will address, or these questions asked upfront will have the vendors and manufacturers be at least aware of that they need to answer them, or at least consider them while putting those equipments in place. And then obviously within the procurement stage also, that you can add some sort of a testing, some sort of an analysis phase where before putting that particular asset into operation or production, you can test that into an environment which is sandboxed, and manage your risk accordingly. But yes, whatever the systems or whatever the assets which are already a part of your infrastructure, I think Shane addressed that issue or that question.
Great, I'll hop on that with another question that came in about equipment, saying based on the use of legacy software and equipment, it may be difficult to ensure that these assets are patched regularly because of compatibility issues. How would, or I guess how should, OT security personnel handle this situation?
All right, I'll take a stab at that. It has been a big problem in that there are a lot of vendors who no longer will support the firmware on their systems, the BIOS, or the actual middleware, or whatever on the systems, because they're developing new systems all the time and they can't keep looking back. And it presents a very real danger when a new risk vulnerability comes out. It might be related to some common protocol, even maybe a TCP/IP protocol, but a vendor is not necessarily going to go to update all of these systems that they developed 10 years ago to address its vulnerability, which is only now disclosed. The best way to do that is actually in terms of not only do you track all the equipment that you have and you track the software levels, firmware levels, but you have to budget so that every few years you can just throw away things which will become unsupportable. And it could be very expensive. So if you don't budget for it, you're not going to get it done. But you have to accept the fact that the way a lot of vendors deal with things, they're not going to forever create patches or provide support for certain critical equipment which you need. So in some cases, you need to know, okay, I have a budget so that in the next, when this equipment hits, say, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years, I have enough budget to throw it out, make sure no one uses it, because chances are it will be vulnerable, and the best response is to just dump it. It's expensive, but it's something that you need to plan and you need to get the business on board for. But you need to be willing to throw away certain systems after they get a certain age if the vendor isn't going to support it.
David, I completely agree. The right answer is replace those systems. Sometimes that's not a possible answer. And so what we do is we try to isolate those systems as much as possible, prevent them from being able to access the outside networks. We put firewalls in place and just really create software where necessary to monitor those systems and make sure that they're behaving the way that they're supposed to, and that they're not getting access to the outside. They're not behaving aberrantly. And so, yeah, just cordon them off.
Yep. And then just one last point that I wanted to add on top of that is sometimes it's and I think the question also mentioned it's difficult to even patch those legacy equipment. So as you want to be able to make it as difficult as possible for other networks and other users to touch that particular equipment. And then the last sort of resort is to have even physical protection so that anyone that has access in person cannot physically alter the operation.
Great points there all around, and especially highlighting the kind of big theme overall, which is to have a plan, right, and be prepared for these situations. So we'll go, we're coming up closer to the top of the hour here, so we'll do, well, one last question, and then we'll try to, for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, thanks for entering them all in, and we'll plan on trying to follow up on some of those questions with you after the webinar. But the last question came in the Q&A from Frederick, asking about whether NREL, USAID provide or sponsor any technical training. And that's a great segue to the closing slides and closing thoughts that we have here. So thanks, Frederick. I swear he's not a plant in the audience, but we'll go to the next slide, please. And I've got a couple ways that USAID and NREL can help here. And ultimately, we've developed all these resources and put on these webinars because we want to help utilities increase their cybersecurity and decrease their cyber risk. And so there's several different resources available. Some of them are static documents and recordings of past webinars that you can access through the Resilient Energy platform, that link that's on the bottom of the slide here. And we're continually creating and producing new resources and documents up there too. But we can also do direct training or direct assistance, whether that's these kind of presentations for your utility. They can be directed for the board of directors, for any kind of executive level, maybe for the technical staff on your IT team, or for the non-technical staff, especially as we think about awareness training throughout an organization. And then we also might be able to offer one-on-one technical assistance. And that's, if you are interested in exploring that for your utility, if you're interested in kind of setting up a follow-up conversation to explore, whether that would be a good option, feel free to, you can reach out to us through several avenues. There's an Ask an Expert feature on the Resilient Energy platform. You can also feel free to type type in the chat if you're comfortable typing in there that you're interested in us having a follow-up exploratory call there. Yeah, we're definitely eager and willing to, and it's all, you know, free help we're offering here. So so please do reach out. We're happy to help. Some of these resources I mentioned here that are on the website, this Power Sector Cybersecurity Building Blocks document is available in a kind of PDF form, but also in a, you know, broken down web page by web page form on the Resilient Energy platform. That's kind of the foundational document for this and the other webinars in this series. This will be recorded. This has been recorded, and the recording will be available on the website too, the slides as well, and they'll also be sent out to attendees. And there's lots of other additional resources too on that website. And then here's another way you can reach out and contact us here. We've got some email addresses on the slide. Please feel free to reach out with follow-up questions, or if you are interested in engaging in or in seeing how we can provide any assistance to you. All right, and then the next slide is the just an announcement about the upcoming webinars in this series. These dates aren't totally set in stone, but we're looking forward to September for a technical controls webinar, for November for one on regulatory compliance, and then moving forward towards January, we'll put on a session on risk management, and then one on IT network security in March. And those are all kind of building up to this Caribbean Cybersecurity Forum that we will be hosting in March of 2022. You can have, well, if you're interested in hearing more information about that and getting all the announcements related to this cybersecurity forum, I would recommend signing up for this USAID NREL partnership newsletter. You can either just type that in a search bar of a browser, or when these slides go out, click on the link that's provided there. And we're also interested in hearing back from you. If you'd like to have these webinars more frequently, or there are certain other topics you'd like us to include, please feel free to reach out and let us know. All right, so with that, thank you everyone for joining. We hope this information was informative and valuable to you. As I said, the slides and the recording will be sent out and will be available on the Resilient Energy Platform website. In general, we look forward to continuing to work towards bolstering utility cybersecurity in the Caribbean and across the world. And if you're interested in working together towards that, please reach out through one of the channels I mentioned earlier, or browse the resources available on the Resilient Energy Platform. So again, thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.